My son-in-law introduced me to the Premier of Ontario as my wife's father. He drives a delivery van. That was the third time. That was the last time. Let me back up. I spent 31 years with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, not riding horses and wearing the red sarge for tourists, though I did that exactly once at a colleague's retirement dinner and never heard the end of it. I worked organized crime. Specifically, I spent the better part of 2 decades running informants inside the triads operating out of Vancouver and Toronto, then another decade building the intelligence framework that eventually dismantled the largest synthetic drug distribution network ever prosecuted in this country. I received the Commissioner's Commendation twice. I shook hands with 3 different prime ministers. At my retirement ceremony in Ottawa, the Commissioner said I'd done more to protect Canadian families than any officer in a generation. Then I came home to Guelph, Ontario, and I started driving for my nephew's courier company 3 mornings a week because I needed something to do with my hands and I liked being on the roads. My daughter met her husband at a charity gala in Toronto. She's a family physician with a practice in Waterloo. Sharp, kind, genuinely good. Her husband, I'll call him by his name, because he earned it being used this way. Preston came from old Upper Canada money. His grandfather had been a lieutenant governor. His father sat on the board of 3 Bay Street firms. Preston himself was a partner at a securities litigation firm downtown, the kind of place whose lobby has real marble and a receptionist who makes you feel underdressed for showing up in clean clothes. The first time Preston saw me, I was coming in from a Thursday morning shift, work jacket, steel-toed boots, company logo on the chest. My daughter's face did something complicated. Not shame, I don't think, more like bracing for impact. Preston looked at the jacket, then at me, then back at the jacket. Delivery, he said. Not a question, more like a filing system. He was putting me somewhere in his head, and the drawer he chose was near the bottom. Part-time, I said. Keeps me moving. He nodded the way you nod at something that doesn't require further thought. My wife, who has known me for 37 years and has more patience than anyone I've ever met, including every hostage negotiator I worked beside, squeezed my hand under the table at dinner that night. Not yet, she was saying. I know, not yet. The second incident was at Preston's firm's client appreciation evening at the Albany Club in Toronto. My daughter had asked me to come, said it would mean a lot to her, said Preston was trying. I wore a good suit. I'd had it since my daughter's medical school graduation, and it still fit, which I considered a personal victory. Preston was introducing me to one of the senior partners, a man named Alistair, when he said it. This is my father-in-law. He's in logistics. Then he turned to answer someone else, leaving Alistair and me standing there. Alistair was polite, asked me about logistics. I told him I drove a van 3 mornings a week and enjoyed it. He laughed, thought I was being modest, kept waiting for the real answer. I didn't give him one. On the drive home, my wife said, "Logistics, accurate, technically. You're not going to tell him, not yet." She looked out the passenger window at the 401 going dark behind us. He's going to keep doing this. I know, and our daughter is going to keep watching him do it. I know that too. Here's what I hadn't told anyone outside of my family and a very small circle of former colleagues. My identity, my real operational identity, the one connected to 31 years of RCMP intelligence work, was still partially protected under federal statute. Not because there was immediate danger, but because several prosecutions stemming from my work were still active in the courts, and the Crown prosecutors had recommended I maintain low visibility until those cases concluded. There were people who'd gone to prison on evidence I'd helped gather, who still had brothers, cousins, associates on the outside with long institutional memories, so I drove a van. I fixed the fence in the backyard. I made my wife coffee at 6 in the morning, and we watched the birds at the feeder, and it was genuinely the best part of every day. Preston had no way of knowing any of this, of course. But what he did have was 30 years of social conditioning that told him a man in a delivery jacket wasn't worth the same attention as a man in a suit, and he trusted that conditioning completely and never questioned it once. The third incident happened 2 weeks before the premier's dinner. My daughter called me on a Sunday afternoon, which she didn't usually do, because Sundays were her only real day off, and she protected them. Her voice was tight in a way I recognized from when she was a teenager trying not to cry in front of me. "Preston thinks it might be better if you and Mum sat at a different table," she said. "At the premier's dinner, he's invited some clients and some people from the firm. He thinks," she stopped, started again. "He said he's worried the conversation will be awkward." I asked her what she'd said. "I told him you were coming and you were sitting wherever I sit." "Good," he said. Another pause. "He said your presence sends a message to his clients, that the family doesn't have a certain kind of standing." I sat with that for a moment. Outside my kitchen window, a pair of chickadees were fighting over the feeder. "Your presence sends a message too," I said. "You know that, right?" She was quiet. "The message you send every time you let him say these things." She started crying then. Not loudly. Just the particular silence on a phone line that means someone is trying very hard to hold themselves together. "I don't know how to make him understand," she said. "You don't have to make him understand anything. That's not your job. He's my husband." "I know, sweetheart. Tell him I'll be there. Front table." The premier's dinner was a fundraiser for a children's hospital foundation held at the Fairmont Royal York in Toronto. It was exactly as formal as it sounds. My daughter was being recognized for her work in rural health access. She'd spent the past 4 years running a mobile clinic program serving remote communities in Northern Ontario, and the foundation wanted to honor that. It was her night. That matters. Remember that. My wife wore a blue dress she'd bought in Edinburgh on a trip we took for our 35th anniversary. I wore the same good suit. We drove down from Guelph together, listened to the radio, talked about the chickadees, talked about whether the fence post needed replacing or just re-cementing. Normal Sunday conversation that happened to be on a Thursday. Preston met us in the lobby. He looked at me the way he always looked at me. A quick assessment, a small adjustment of expression, the professional smile clicking into place. He shook my hand, called me by my first name the way people do when they want to remind you that you're on a first-name basis with them, as if that established something. We were halfway through the cocktail hour when it happened. I'd stepped away from the table to get my wife a glass of water. She doesn't drink, and the servers kept forgetting, and when I came back, Preston was talking to a cluster of people that included a man I recognized immediately. His name was Commissioner Leonard Fairweather, and he had taken over as RCMP Commissioner 3 years after I retired. I'd briefed him personally when he was still Deputy Commissioner. We'd spent 2 days together in a boardroom in Ottawa going over the intelligence architecture I'd built, and he'd told me afterward that the briefing was one of the most valuable of his career. Preston was in the middle of a sentence when I walked up. He barely glanced at me, kept going. "And of course the firm has been very involved in public safety policy. We've done work with the RCMP on." Commissioner Fairweather looked past Preston and saw me. His face changed. "George," he said. He stepped around Preston and shook my hand with both of his. "I had no idea you'd be here." Preston stopped talking. "Commissioner," I said, "congratulations on the appointment. It's well deserved." "Don't give me that. You'd have run circles around the selection committee, and we both know it." He turned to the group. "This man built the intelligence framework that 4 different national security operations have run on. We still train from his playbook." There was a moment of silence that had a particular texture to it, the texture of a room recalibrating. Preston said, You two know each other?" George was one of the most decorated intelligence officers in RCMP history, Fairweather said, still looking at me like he was confirming I was actually standing there. What did you end up doing in retirement? Please don't tell me something boring. I drive a delivery van 3 mornings a week, I said. Fairweather laughed. Of course you do. He said it with complete warmth, like this was the most sensible thing he'd heard all year. Preston was very still. Wait, said one of the people in the circle. A woman from the foundation board, I found out later. RCMP commissioner, so this is like significant? He's being modest, Fairweather said. He's the reason we have the intelligence capacity we have today. Multiple prosecutions, several $100 million in criminal assets seized, and he never let anyone know. He shook his head. That's the job, though. That's the real job. My wife appeared at my elbow. She had characteristically excellent timing. Helen, Fairweather said, shaking her hand. 30-plus years of being married to a man who couldn't tell you where he was or what he was doing. How are you still standing? I had excellent instincts about character, she said, and gave Preston a look so brief and precise it was almost surgical. We moved toward the dining room. Preston fell into step beside me, slightly behind, as if he was no longer sure where he was supposed to be. You were RCMP, he said. Yes. For how long? 31 years. And you just didn't mention it. You didn't ask. He was quiet for a moment. I could hear him working through it. I introduced you to Alistair as being in logistic. You did. I told the Premier's office. He stopped. Started again. I requested that you be seated at a secondary table. I know. Another silence. Why didn't you say anything? I stopped walking. We were in the corridor outside the main ballroom, and the noise of the cocktail hour was behind us, and it was suddenly quiet enough to have a real conversation. Because I wanted to see what you'd do when you thought I was just a man who drove a van, I said. Some people are exactly the same whether they're talking to the commissioner or the courier, and some people aren't. He looked at me for a long moment. He was a smart man, I'll give him that. He was genuinely intelligent, and I could see him understanding exactly what I'd just said. I owe you an apology, he said. Yes, more than one. Yes, I don't know if. He paused. I'm not sure how to, Preston. I kept my voice even. This conversation isn't really about me. My feelings about how you've treated me are uncomplicated. What's complicated is what my daughter has been watching for 2 years while you did it. He looked away. There was something happening in his face that I suspected didn't happen there very often. Inside the ballroom, dinner was announced. My daughter's presentation was the highlight of the evening. She spoke without notes for 8 minutes about a woman in a community north of Thunder Bay who'd been managing her diabetes without proper care for 6 years until the mobile clinic reached her. She spoke about what it costs people, not in dollars, though she mentioned those too, to live an hour and a half from the nearest physician. She was precise and she was passionate, and when she finished the room, gave her a standing ovation that felt earned in a way the polite ones don't. Preston applauded, but he was watching her differently than he had before. Or maybe I was watching him differently. Hard to say. The commissioner gave a brief address after dinner, and at one point he mentioned, without naming me directly, that some of the most important public safety work in Canadian history had been done by people the public would never know about, and that the willingness to serve without recognition was itself a form of courage. Several people at our table nodded. My wife put her hand on mine. Preston didn't say anything for most of the drive back to the hotel where we were all staying overnight. When we reached the lobby, he stopped me. Can I ask you something? Sure, the work you did. Was it dangerous? Sometimes? How dangerous? I thought about a night in 1997 outside a warehouse in Richmond, BC. I thought about a motel room in Mississauga in 2003 where I sat for 4 hours not entirely sure I was going to leave. I thought about the call I took in my kitchen one February morning telling me that an informant I'd run for 3 years had been found in the Don River. Occasionally very, I said. He nodded slowly. And then you retired and drove a van. And then I retired and drove a van. He looked at his shoes. I've been an idiot. You've had certain advantages your whole life, I said. People with certain advantages sometimes forget that value doesn't announce itself. He looked up. That's a very generous way of saying it. I'm a generous man. Ask my daughter. There was a moment that wasn't quite comfortable, but wasn't quite hostile either. Something in the middle. Something that felt like the beginning of a different conversation, or possibly the end of an old one. My daughter came through the lobby doors then, still holding the foundation's recognition plaque. She looked at the two of us standing there, and her face did something complicated again. But this time it was different, lighter. "Should I be worried?" she said. "No," Preston said. "I was just apologizing to your father." She looked at me. "He was," I confirmed. She nodded once, slowly, the way she used to nod as a child when something had finally been settled. We had breakfast together the next morning in the hotel restaurant, the four of us. Preston asked me questions, real ones, the kind that require actual listening to answer. About the work, about the cases, about how I'd managed to compartmentalize for so many years to be one person at home and another person entirely in the field. I told him the truth. You don't compartmentalize, not really. You carry all of it all the time. You just get good at choosing what you show. He asked why I'd kept driving the van after everything came out. "Because I made a promise to my nephew," I said. "And because I like Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6 in the morning, when the roads are empty and the radio plays whatever it wants and nobody needs anything from me." He thought about that. "Do you think you'll ever fully retire?" "From what? The van or the other thing?" "Either. The RCMP has asked me to consult on 2 cold cases from my era," I said. "I said yes to that part-time. The van I'll keep until my nephew doesn't need me anymore." I picked up my coffee. Retirement isn't a destination. It's just choosing which parts of yourself you want to keep showing up. Preston was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I called Alistair last night, told him I'd misrepresented you." "You didn't have to do that, I know." My wife met my eye across the table, 37 years of reading each other's faces. She gave me the smallest nod. 3 months have passed since that dinner. Things are different, not perfectly so, not overnight, but genuinely different. Preston has dinner with us in Guelph now without the performance. He asks about the van. He asked my wife once, very carefully, what it had been like being married to someone whose work she couldn't know about, and she gave him a real answer and he listened to the whole thing. My daughter called me last Tuesday morning while I was on my route. "How's the road?" she said. "Clear," I said. "How's your patient load?" "Heavy, but good." We talked for a few minutes about nothing in particular. The chickadees, whether the fence post needed replacing. She sounded like herself, the self she'd been before 2 years of walking a tightrope between her husband and her father had started wearing her down. Before she hung up, she said, "Dad, yeah, I'm sorry it took me so long to just say something when he did those things. You were trying to hold your family together. I was trying to avoid conflict. Same thing sometimes." "Not always." "No," I said, "not always." The last house on my Tuesday route is a bungalow on the south end of Guelph. An older man who orders things online because his knees are bad and he can't get to the shops easily. We've talked every Tuesday morning for 8 months. He doesn't know my last name. I don't know his. We've discussed hockey, weather, his late wife's recipe for butter tarts, and the correct way to re-cement a fence post, which he has opinions about. Last Tuesday, he took the package and said, "You look like you had a good week." "I did," I said. "Good week or good news?" I thought about my daughter's voice on the phone, about Preston asking a real question and waiting for the real answer, about Commissioner Fairweather shaking my hand in a hotel corridor in Toronto. "Both," I said. He nodded and went inside, and I walked back to the van in the November light and sat for a minute before starting the engine. 31 years of work I can't talk about publicly. A pension that reflects it. Medals in a lockbox in the basement. And every Tuesday morning, a package delivered on time to a man with bad knees who thinks I'm just the delivery guy, He's right too. That's exactly what I am on Tuesdays. The rest of it is just the rest of it, and some days that's more than enough.